I went to prison at 18, and I did not come home until I was about 30, 12 years. I bring that up for one reason tonight. Somewhere in the middle of that stretch, a man handed me the story of Joseph, the one from the book of Genesis, and he told it the way most people tell it. The dreamer with the colorful coat, sold by his jealous brothers, who trusts God and rises to rule Egypt, and it all works out. A rags to riches story with a bow on top, and I nodded, because that is the version everybody gets. But then I actually read it slowly, over years, in a place that gave me a lot of time to read. And I have to tell you, the story I found in the text is not the story I was told. The real one is harder and slower and far more useful to a man behind a locked door. Let me set my own case aside now and walk you through it, because almost everything that matters in Joseph's life is in the parts people skip. Start with the coat and the dreams, because the Sunday version makes Joseph a flawless victim and the text does not. Yes, his brothers hated him, and yes, that hatred was wrong. But look at how the boy behaved. His father openly favored him and dressed him in a special coat that marked him out as the favorite, and Joseph did nothing to soften that. Then he had dreams where his family bowed down to him, and he did not keep them to himself. He told his brothers, twice, in detail, that they would one day bow to him. In the first dream, they were all binding sheaves of grain in a field, and his sheaf stood up straight while theirs gathered around and bowed to it. In the second, the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to him, which even his father understood to mean the whole family, parents included, bending the knee to this boy. And Joseph told them both, out loud, to their faces. Picture being one of 10 older brothers and having the favorite little brother describe in detail his dream of you kneeling to him. He even told his father, who scolded him for it, though the text says his father kept the matter in mind. This is a young man with something true from God and no wisdom at all about how to carry it. He flaunted it. Now understand me, that does not excuse what the brothers did. But the Bible is not giving us a cardboard saint and a pack of villains. It is giving us a real family, with a father playing favorites, a boy who is proud and tactless, and brothers whose jealousy curdles into something dangerous. Real people, all of them wrong in their own way. The story is more honest than the flannel graph. Then the hatred boils over. The brothers see him coming in that coat, out in the fields far from home, and they decide to be rid of him for good. They throw him into a dry pit, and here is a detail the clean version glosses. The text says that while their own brother was down in that pit, they sat down and ate a meal. They could hear him, and they ate. Then a caravan of traders comes by, and they pull him out and sell him their own blood for 20 pieces of silver, like livestock. And they take that famous coat, dip it in animal blood, and carry it back to their father to make him believe a wild animal had taken his son. So their father spends years grieving a boy who is actually alive and enslaved in a foreign country. That is where the story really begins. Not with a promotion, with a 17-year-old sold by his family and hauled off in chains to a place where he does not speak the language. Now watch what the text repeats, because it is the key to the whole thing, and it is not what you would expect. In Egypt, Joseph is bought by an official named Potiphar. And Genesis says plainly, the Lord was with Joseph. Not the Lord rescued Joseph. Not the Lord got him his freedom back. The Lord was with him while he was still a slave. And because God was with him, he did everything well. And Potiphar noticed and put him in charge of the whole household. So far, the clean version can keep up. But here is where it falls apart, because doing everything right does not protect him. Potiphar's wife tries again and again to pull him into sin, and he refuses every time on principle. He will not betray his master or his God. And for that integrity, she accuses him falsely of the very thing he refused to do, and he is thrown into prison. Read that carefully. He is not punished for giving in to temptation. He is punished for resisting it. He did the right thing, and it cost him worse than the wrong thing would have. Any man who has tried to do right and watched it blow up in his face knows exactly how bitter that is. And even there, in that prison, The same quiet line follows him. The text says the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and gave him favor in the eyes of the keeper, and before long the keeper had put everything in the prison under Joseph's hand. Sit with how strange that is. The man cannot get himself out of the cell, but inside it he becomes trusted, responsible, the one everything runs through. That tells you what God being with him actually produced. Not an open door, but a certain kind of man, one who did not fall apart or turn bitter or stop being useful just because his circumstances were unjust. He kept becoming trustworthy in a place that gave him every excuse not to. I watched the difference between those two kinds of men for 12 years. Same walls, same unfairness, and some men rotted while others somehow grew. The growing ones all had something steadier than their circumstances holding them up. And now comes the part the story you were told skips almost entirely: the waiting. We race from the pit to the palace in a single breath, as if it were quick. It was not. Joseph was 17 when he was sold. The text tells us he was 30 when he finally stood before Pharaoh. Do that math. 13 years. 13 years a slave and a prisoner in a foreign land, most of them for things he did not do. The dreams God gave him as a boy did not come true for over a decade, and for most of that decade, every single piece of evidence said those dreams were a joke. That is not a highlight reel, that is a long, grinding sentence, and the Bible makes you sit in it if you actually read it. And inside that prison, the same line comes back. The Lord was with Joseph in the prison. Again, notice what that did and did not mean. It did not open the door. It did not shorten the years. God being with him was not a rescue plan. It was a presence in a place God did not immediately take him out of. That was the single most important thing I learned from this story in my own cell, and it is the thing the cheerful version cannot teach you, because it is in too much of a hurry to get to the happy ending. God with you is not the same as God getting you out. Joseph had the first for 13 years before he had anything that looked like the second. Then there is the cupbearer. And this is the detail that ought to stop anybody who has ever had their hopes raised and dropped. In prison, Joseph correctly interprets the dreams of two of Pharaoh's officials who had landed in the same cell, a cupbearer and a baker. Both had troubling dreams on the same night, and Joseph read them straight. For the cupbearer, the dream meant restoration, back to his old position in 3 days. For the baker, the dream did not carry good news, and Joseph, to his credit, told him the truth anyway instead of flattering him, and both came true exactly as he said. He tells the cupbearer he will be restored, and he asks the man one thing: remember me. When you are back in the palace, mention me to Pharaoh, get me out of this pit I did not earn. And the cupbearer is restored exactly as Joseph said. And the very last line of that chapter is a gut punch. The cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. And the next chapter opens with 3 words that carry an ocean of silence in them. 2 full years. Joseph sat in that prison 2 more full years after the one man who could have helped him walked out and forgot he existed. Think about the hope of that day the cupbearer left, and then think about the next 700 mornings waking up in the same cell, forgotten. The story you were told does not have those 2 years in it. But those 2 years are the story. That is where the character of the man was actually forged. In the forgetting, in the silence, in the waiting, with no sign that any of it meant anything. And I want to name the real danger of a stretch like that because I lived a version of it. When you are forgotten that long, the temptation is not to stop believing in God. The temptation is to conclude that God has forgotten you the same way the cupbearer did. That your case has been set down somewhere and lost, that the presence you once felt has quietly moved on to people whose lives are going somewhere. Nothing in Joseph's circumstances would have argued against that thought for 2 long years. And yet the narrator of Genesis, looking back, keeps insisting the Lord was with him the whole time, including the stretch where Joseph almost certainly could not feel it. That gap between what was true and what he could feel is the hardest country a believing man ever walks through. Joseph walked it for years before the door ever moved. Only after all of that does the rise finally come. Pharaoh has dreams no one can explain. The cupbearer finally remembers the young Hebrew in the prison. Joseph is rushed out, cleaned up, and stood in front of the most powerful man in the world. And he interprets the dreams, 7 years of plenty and seven of famine. And he does not just interpret, he offers a plan to save the whole region. And Pharaoh, seeing the wisdom in him, puts him in charge of all of Egypt in a single afternoon. The boy from the pit is now second only to the throne. But do not let the speed of that moment erase the 13 years it took to get there. The rise was quick. The preparation for it was brutally slow. God spent more than a decade making the man before he ever gave him the position. And there is a small detail in there that shows you what all those years had done to his heart. When Joseph has two sons in Egypt, he names them, and the names are a window. He calls the first Manasseh, saying, God has made me forget all my trouble and my father's house. And the second he calls Ephraim, saying, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Read those again. He does not name his sons out of bitterness. He names them as a man who has watched God work even in the country of his suffering, the land of my affliction. He does not pretend Egypt was not the place of his pain. He says God made him fruitful right there inside it. That is not a man who got his happy ending and forgot the pit. That is a man still carrying the pit and naming his children after the strange mercy of being made fruitful in the middle of it. And when the famine finally drives his brothers to bow in front of him for food, the boyhood dream he had blurted out so tactlessly all those years before comes true. Exactly. The sheaves bow. The brothers kneel to the one they sold. But notice, by the time it happens, Joseph is not gloating over it. The proud boy who announced the dream is gone. 13 years in the dark had burned the arrogance out of him, and what stands there when the dream finally comes true is not a boy enjoying his victory, but a broken and remade man who can barely hold himself together at the sight of them. And then the story does something the clean version really mishandles, because the reunion with his brothers is not a warm greeting card moment. Years later, the famine drives those same brothers down to Egypt to buy food, and they bow in front of the governor without recognizing that he is the brother they sold. And Joseph does not fall on their necks weeping right away. He wrestles with it. He tests them over chapters. He accuses them of being spies. He holds one brother, Simeon, back in custody and sends the rest home with a demand that they return with the youngest, Benjamin. He has their silver secretly slipped back into their sacks, so they are frightened and confused. And when they finally come back with Benjamin, he has his own silver cup hidden in the boy's sack, and then has them chased down and accused of theft, so that it looks like the youngest, their father's new favorite, will be taken as a slave. He is recreating, on purpose, the exact situation that started it all. A father about to lose a favored young son. He is testing whether these men will do to Benjamin what they once did to him, or whether they have become something else. This is not a man for whom forgiveness came easy or instant. The text says more than once that he had to turn away from them to weep in private, then compose himself and come back. Forgiveness was tearing at him. He was not performing serenity. He was fighting his way toward it in real time. And what he was testing for matters, because it teaches something the slogans about forgiveness get wrong. Joseph was watching to see whether his brothers had actually changed, and he got his answer when he threatened to keep the youngest brother, Benjamin, and Judah, the very brother who years earlier had suggested selling Joseph, stepped forward and offered himself as a slave in the boy's place. The man who once sold a brother for silver was now willing to trade his own freedom to protect one. That was the evidence. These were not the same men. And only then does Joseph break and reveal himself and weep so loudly the whole house hears it. His forgiveness was real, but it was not blind, and it was not instant, and it followed proof that the men in front of him were different. That is a truer picture of how forgiveness and rebuilt trust actually work than the version where you are simply supposed to feel warm toward everyone who ever wronged you. Which brings us to the sentence everyone quotes, and even here the clean version softens it. At the very end, after their father is gone, the brothers panic, sure that now Joseph will finally take his revenge. And Joseph says to them, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to save many lives. Here both halves." He does not say what you did was not so bad. He looks at them and calls it evil to their faces, the same word for what it was. And in the same breath, he says God worked through that evil to bring about something that kept thousands alive through the famine, including their whole family. Two true things at once. Their intent was evil, God's purpose through it was good. He never once pretends the pit was a gift. He says God brought life out of it anyway. And notice he adds, "Am I in the place of God?" He refuses to appoint himself their judge. He leaves that where it belongs. The mercy is real, the harm is named, and the vengeance is handed to God instead of carried by Joseph. That is a mature man's forgiveness, and it took him a lifetime and 13 years in the dark to be able to say it. So let me tell you plainly why the story you were told is not the real one. The real Joseph was not a flawless boy. He was proud and unwise, and God used him anyway. The real story is not mostly about a rise. It is mostly about waiting. 13 years of it, most of it forgotten and unfair. The line the Bible keeps repeating is not "the Lord rescued Joseph," it is "the Lord was with Joseph," which is a promise of presence, not a promise of escape. And the forgiveness at the end was not a soft, instant feeling. It was slow, tearful, tested, and honest about the evil it forgave. Strip all of that out to make a tidy children's story and you lose the exact parts a suffering person actually needs. The bow on top is the part that gets remembered, but the bow was never where the strength was. The strength was in the 13 years nobody puts on the felt board, the years of a man staying faithful and useful and unbroken in a place that owed him nothing and gave him less. That is the part I needed, not the promotion, the prison, and the God who was in it with him the whole time. Now I have to be careful, because this is where a man like me could grab this story and misuse it, and I will not. Joseph was innocent. The pit and the prison were things done to him, not things he earned. When I went into my cell, I was not Joseph. I had earned my place there, and I will not drape his innocence over my own record to make myself the hero of a story that is not mine. That difference is real, and I refuse to blur it. But here is what carried across, and it is the thing that held me on the worst nights. What sustained Joseph in that prison was never his innocence. It was that God was with him in it. And that presence, the one thing that actually got him through the years, was never something reserved only for the innocent. A guilty man in a cell can be met by the same God who sat with Joseph in his, even when the door does not open, even when the cupbearer forgets, even when the years pile up with no sign that any of it means a thing. That is why I needed the real version and not the one I was handed. The tidy story says, trust God and it all works out fast. The true story says you may wait 13 years, you may be forgotten, you may do everything right and still land in a cell, and God will be with you in it, and something you cannot yet see may be taking shape in the dark. That is a story a prisoner can actually live on. And it means the men and women watching this from inside a hard place, whether you put yourself there like I did or whether it was done to you like it was done to him, are not outside the reach of the God who was with Joseph. He specializes in pits. He works in the waiting. He was never only for the innocent. And if you are in one of those long silences right now, the kind where the one person who could have helped you has forgotten your name, I am not going to hand you the tidy promise that it lifts next week. Joseph's did not. What I can hand you is the one line the story refuses to drop, the line that was true in the pit and true in Potiphar's house and true through 2 forgotten years in a cell. Whether or not the man in the cell could feel it on any given morning, he was not alone in it. The waiting was not proof of abandonment. It was, though he could not have known it at the time, the exact place he was being made into the man who could one day save the very brothers who sold him. Next time I want to walk the road of another prisoner in that book, the Apostle Paul, who wrote some of the most hopeful words in the Bible from inside a chain, and who, unlike Joseph, had once been a man who put other people in them. But for tonight, hold the true version of Joseph, not the one with the bow on top. 13 years, a forgotten man in a foreign cell, and one quiet line repeating through all of it, refusing to leave him, even when freedom did. The Lord was with him. That was the whole story. It just took the waiting to make it visible.